Now, Baroness Michelle Mone is all over the front pages of our national newspapers today. She gave a big interview to the BBC yesterday, following on from a few press reports in the last couple of weeks, in which she says, look, I didn't tell the truth. You know, myself, my husband Doug, we were involved with a firm called MedPro. We previously said we were not. And it turns out, from the £200 million worth of orders they got from the government, they made a profit of about 60 million. And there's now today been a war of words between her and between Rishi Sunak. So on the face of it, this looks like the great scandal to have come out of the pandemic. But folks, it really isn't. And here's why. At the start of the pandemic, the Department of Health were desperately short of PPE across 7 major categories. For example, sterilised gowns, we were down to a supply of 1 day's stock. So during that period, when the pandemic kicked in, from February to July 2020, the department purchased, wait for it, 5 years' worth of PPE. Up to £10 billion worth of PPE purchased that has been written off, destroyed, or lost. The prices they paid for it were about 5 times what the prices had been during the pandemic itself. And whichever way you look at this, we had PPE stored at 70 locations over the country. Some of it was still being stored in China. In fact, we were actually paying £400 million per annum simply in storage fees. £10 billion worth of our money was literally wasted. About £3 billion of the PPE your money went on actually got used. How could government have over-ordered on this scale? How on earth could they have wasted up to £10 billion of money? There were over 14,000 companies that applied for PPE contracts. Many people making very, very big profits out of it indeed. And yes, of course, there was a high priority lane where those that were known to government ministers had a much better chance of getting the orders. And of course, Baroness Mone was a part of that. I believe the real scandal of this pandemic is that government over-ordered PPE, most of which after a year in storage wasn't fit for purpose anyway. The real scandal is they wasted £10 billion of our money, and the inquiry that is going on will not be discussing procurement until 2025. You simply couldn't make it up. So I ask you, is the Michelle Mone story the real scandal of the pandemic, or is what I'm talking about far bigger? Please give me your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined by Neil Wallace, former Chief Executive Editor of the News of the World. Neil, welcome to the new studios.
Welcome. Very plush.
It looks good. So far, so good.
Yeah. So, I haven't broken it yet.
There's always time. The Baroness Mone story, how do you respond to it?
I think you're half right and half wrong. I think where you're half right, the figures are shocking, they're appalling. She is simply unbelievably, dreadfully crass. I mean, she deserves everything she's getting. You know, if your defence is I basically lied to the world because I wanted to pocket 60 million quid, you need better PR advisors. Where I think what you miss is that at the time, the world was panic-stricken.
Yep.
I think what you're not taking into account is this wasn't just happening in this country. We were bidding for this stuff against America, against the Chinese themselves who were making it, against the EU. They were all bidding against each other because they were all panic-stricken. And what the real scandal, I think, of COVID is going to be, we got it wrong. Jeremy Hunt was supposed to plan for this, and he got it catastrophically wrong. And that led inevitably to one thing. Now, I understand.
I get that, Neil. I mean, look, you know, we had Professor Neil Ferguson telling us goodness knows what was coming down the track at us. But the fact is they ordered 5 years' worth of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with any of that. What it really shows you, I think, Nigel, is the complete panic that was in the government at the time. They didn't have a clue what to do. And so they were running around like headless chickens, buying here, grabbing this, taking it off the shelves. It was just the same as when, do you remember when there was the toilet paper shortage and you saw people wheeling wheelie bins of the stuff down the road? Do you remember?
I do.
This was an international government-sized version of that.
Shouldn't we expect better of our leaders?
I think we should certainly have expected better of our structure, of our civil servants, of our... yes, you're right, of course we should. Yeah. But they were panic-stricken.
Yeah, that's not an excuse. I expect better from our leaders.
Yeah, I think you're entitled to.
And the thought to me that this endless inquiry, which is going to go on for years, that we're not even going to discuss how 10 billion quid disappeared. It won't even come before the committee until 2025.
But Nigel, they're not even going to discuss where the damn thing came from. Did it originated in a Chinese laboratory? Yeah. Did it come from bats in wherever, Wuhan? You and I don't know, and we're not an inch nearer knowing. No. And this inquiry, which is going to throw as much money at this as MedPro got, right? Though who will get the £60 million profit, I don't know. Now, there is no question, people like Michelle Mone and her husband are the unacceptable face of capitalism. They fill their boots.
They would argue, and they do argue, that everything they did was in line with standard government procedure of the time in the panic. And they would argue that the masks and gowns they got for the government were cheaper than many of their competitors.
They would argue that, and they've made 30% profit out of it, and they stand there. And I remember at the time how mealy-mouthed they were. We're doing this for the country. We're trying to help out.
No suggestion that I can see they've done anything illegal.
Well, we'll find that out, won't we? Because there is a criminal investigation.
They've been referred
to be honest,
to the NCA.
I think they are utterly appalling people. I'm a long-term conservative. I believe in free enterprise, but they fill their boots at this country's terror.
Well, their sin was to lie to the press, and people are saying if you lie to the press, you've lied to the country. She has apologised for that. More will come out, but you see my point here. Whatever she may or may not have done wrong, what the government did is far worse.
I think that the catastrophe that came out of what the government failed to do, it's about government failings. You're absolutely right. Yeah. This was a catastrophic failure. And who paid for it? We're paying for it.
I know.
But what happened was there was this failure, and people thought we can fill our boots here. Yeah, and amongst them was Michelle Mone.
And many, many others.
And many others.
Neil Wallace, as ever, great to have you in the studio. Now,